Get it on, bang a gong, get it on.
I love it when things work out. Once we decided on the 24 albums we were going to do for this season, I intentionally put them in a random order. But somehow we ended up with a nice little bookend, with Genesis and Steve Hillage starting things off, and Peter Gabriel and Gong ending the season.
This week we're taking a look at one of the more enduring progressive rock groups, pioneers of the space subgenre, Gong. One with a very vast catalog, probably the biggest one out of all the Canterbury groups.
Over the course of the last 6 months, I've learned a good amount about progressive rock I hadn't known before. Subgenres, history, names, places. It's been a cool run. So I think it's only fitting that we end season 3 with another album from the Canterbury scene, considering how much time we've spent getting into that particular niche. One bit of information I've picked up that specifically pertains to this week's album. I do remember reading that Gong's lineup for the Shamal album was short-lived, that Shamal is kind of a transition between the Radio Gnome Invisible era and the more percussion-heavy era that ensued after Pierre Morlaine filled the bandleader role.
Their debut album, Magic Brother, came out in 1970. The psychedelic space rock sound that they were known for pioneering didn't really come to fruition until the next album, which was called Camembert Electrique. After that, the group embarked on a trilogy of albums that became probably their best-known records, known by the whimsical title of the Radio Gnome Invisible Trilogy. And these albums describe the adventures of 3 particular characters, including Zero the Hero, the Good Witch Yoni, and the Pothead Pixies from Planet Gong.
Looking at the credits for Shamal, I see a few familiar names, Mike Howlett, Didier Malherbe, Pierre Morlaine, Muriel Bauer. For a Canterbury band, there sure are a lot of French people in Gong.
What are you doing in England? Mind your own business!
I don't know, are they really English though? They started in Paris, but they were started by British people, so I don't know.
Even a guest appearance by Steve Hillage. These are all names I recognize from previous Gong albums, but no David Allen for this one.
This is a vast group. The number of people that have been in and out of this band numbers over 50. The original founders, David Allen and Julie Smith, were basically astral hippies. Some of the most notable members were, of course, Dieter Malherbe,
Didier Malherbe,
Pip Pyle, Steve Hillage, Mike Howlett, Tim Blake, Pierre Morlaine, Bill Laswell, and more recently, Theo Travis. There's some other notable people that play with them briefly, including Don Cherry, the famous jazz trumpeter, Chris Cutler, Bill Bruford, Dave Stewart, and Brian Davidson.
Also, it looks like this one was produced by Nick Mason. Last time we encountered him was Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom album. Hope nobody had to get injured this time. I don't really recognize any of the song titles. Well, mostly. I think Wingful of Eyes is a name they use for one of their compilation albums. But hey, I'm already a fan. I'm excited to hear this bit of transitional Gong. So how do I explain what I just heard? Well, the obvious thing is that the type and style of musical influences on Shamal are much broader and more diverse than anything I've heard from them previously. There are times that sound exactly like Yusef Lateef or Pharoah Sanders. There are times that sound like the apostrophe to one-size-fits-all era of Frank Zappa's catalog. Times that sound like Mwandishi era Herbie Hancock. And one bit that sounds something like a jam between Tuareg and Ainu folk musicians. You want to explain exactly what you meant by that last bit? Maybe later, because the larger observation I'm trying to impart is that there seems to be a pattern I'm hearing in these tunes. Something that goes like this. First, introduce completely novel and interesting musical elements. Then, interrupt this new thing and have a jolly good Canterbury-style gong jam for a span.
They're really not quite like any of their Canterbury peers. A lot of Canterbury groups wrote really intricate arrangements that were full of all kinds of surprising twists and turns. And Gong has some of that, but it's played down significantly in favor of cool jamming and improv. Which is a sound that's become rather common in a lot of modern jam bands, but Gong was doing this back in the early 70s. So they really are pioneers of the jam genre, even if a lot of people that are associated with it are probably unaware of that.
And that pattern can happen once or multiple times in a song. Yeah, like that, but add all the mallet percussions. Vibes, marimba, xylophone, bells, glockenspiel, all of them. The first, minute and a half or so of Wingful of Eyes could very easily have come from Karma or Hush and Thunder or any one of the other 70s spiritual jazz recordings. The spell is broken when he starts the singing, though. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with Mike Howlett's voice, it's just not Leon Thomas or the Sweet Inspirations. Another minute and a half later, they abandon the spiritual jazz vibe altogether and get into something that feels very much like earlier Gong. The fills by Steve Hillage certainly don't hurt. The start of Chandra is one of the most Zappa sounding things I've heard on someone else's album. But the groove that follows for the sax improv is a laid back and slightly funky 4/4 with bass brought right up front and that signature 70s British dry and mellow drum sound. Classic Gong. After that solo, the song seems to go back and forth between groovy little groove things and highly orchestrated and technically difficult interludes fronted by the mallets. This continues even after the vocals come in. And I like this. Bringing it back to something musical each time unifies the song. They even managed to make the 11/8 groove at the end feel a bit funky. The first listen of Bambooji, the intro felt to me very much like Far East Asian flutes over North African rhythms, hence the Tuareg meets Ainu comment from earlier. But on the second listen, it's actually weirder than that, because the flute that Didier Malherbe is playing is a bansuri from the Indian subcontinent. And in fact, even though the melody starts very much in a Kigaku style, it kind of morphs to include more Hindustani classical elements as the North African style drums come in. And the rest of Bambooji is more of the same, kind of a fever dream of sounds from all over the place. It's charming, but if you know even a little about ethnomusicology, it can be distracting. 10 seconds into my first spin of Cat in Clark's Shoes, and I had to stop the music and grab an instrument to find out exactly what that groove is all about. This is one of the most complicated set of 4 notes ever played on a bass guitar. Check this out. All right, so the whole bit is like a measure of 6 and then 2 measures of 5, all in the key of D, right? Well, here's the thing though. 6 plus 5 plus 5 is 16. So you can think of the whole thing as 2 bars of 4/4. I love stuff like that. Mandrake is nice enough, half ethereal, chimey vibes and flute, half riff-based 1-chord saxophone jam, with some mallets, some flute, and some bass to end the tune. And finally, the title track, Shamal. Starts off very much in the style of early 70s funk, with a groove and a timbral palette that wouldn't be out of place on a Headhunters album. But like on Chandra, the vocals appear pretty late in the song, not starting until about 3.5 minutes into the tune. This cues a shift in the song for a bit, as the mallets and violin trade short solos over a very fusion groove, before landing back in Headhunters territory with vocals, sax, and some Jack Bruce-style lead bass. So far, I like Shamal okay. It does seem a bit less focused and directed when compared to earlier Gong I'm familiar with, but by the same token, the direction in which they're heading more open tunes with greater emphasis on mallet percussion. These are good things, I think.
In 1975, David Allen and Gilly Smith decided to leave the band. Their departure changed the group's trajectory, so much so that they would eventually change their name to Pierre Morland's Gong and went in a more fusion direction with a heavy emphasis on percussion. And it's wonderful sounding music that is really unlike anything that came previously with this group.
And as I'm thinking about it, over the week I plan to... Shamal is pretty great, I think. When I listen to the Gong catalog in order, putting Shamal after Flying Teapot, Angel's Egg, and You, I hear artistic maturity that reminds me a lot of National Health when compared to Hatfield in the North. There is a sense of flower child aesthetic and absurdist playfulness that I think is lost on Shamal.
And the psychedelic connotation that goes along with this group is strong. Pothead pixies and flying teapots full of mushroom tea. As a matter of fact, I'd say they're probably the most humorous of all of them.
But what it has gained in overall musicality is immediately apparent. That being said, there's also not a clear artistic direction or unifying thesis. Much like what I was hearing last week on Peter Gabriel's Scratch album, it sounds as if Gong are trying on several different stylistic possibilities to see if any of them fit. The music on Bambouji and the title track Shamal sound like they were recorded by completely different bands. And while that's undeniably a testament to how great Mike, Didier, Mireille, Pierre, and Patrice are as musicians, it also means that Shamal as an album falls into the category of collection of songs rather than unified work. But the songs are pretty great. Yeah, they really are.
If you like Gong and are craving more of that, fear not. Their catalog is vast and their family tree has many branches. And the albums that came from Pierre Morland's Gong include Gazoos from 1976, also known as Espresso here in North America, Espresso 2, a fan favorite, from 1978, Downwind from 1979, Time is the Key from 1979, Leave It Open from 1981, and there are various others after that. In the early 90s, they actually reunited with David in command again and put out an album called Shapeshifter, and followed that up in the year 2000 with Zero to Infinity. And they also teamed up with fusion group Acid Mother's Temple for a group called Acid Motherhood in 2004. In 2009, they released the album 2032, and they released a fine album called I See You, which would be the last one with David before he passed away. That wasn't a deterrent, though, and David wanted them to continue after his departure. They've gone on to release 2 more albums since he passed away, including Rejoice, I'm Dead from 2016 and The Universe Also Collapses in 2019. And they continue to this day, and we wish them the best. Boy, there's a lot of offshoots to enjoy also. Probably the first place you might want to start is a group that Gilly Smith did called Mother Gong. Another great group that was kind of a Gong offshoot is called Gongzilla. Check out that album. Alan Holsworth guests on a bit of that. But if you want some groups that were inspired by them as well, I would start with a group called Ozric Tentacles. And as mentioned, I would check out the fusion group Acid Mother's Temple. And don't forget the actor from The Jeffersons, Sherman Hemsley. He was such a big Gong fan, he had a flying teapot room in his house. That's devotion. There's other Gongs out there too. Feel free to bang them.
And since this is the last official episode of Season 3, cough cough, I wanted to take a moment to recognize a few people. This channel started off as a pandemic project. Something to keep me involved with music, while live music was shut down almost entirely. But what I've found over the past couple of years is I really like getting the opportunity to discover new things about music, history, and myself. So I kept it up, investing in some better equipment and better tools, but by no means is this a solo project any longer. The collages of prog rock art that I use for my backgrounds, they were created by Lori Jocelyn, and I think they're all wonderful. I'm very grateful to her for all her hard work. My wife Emily also helped with proofreading, and I again want to sincerely thank James Walken, who was the source for each of the albums I looked at this season. Cannot thank you enough for passing these gems on to us. But of course, my biggest thanks goes to Sean Tonar for lending me his time and expertise over these past 6 months. He and I will continue working together on his Soul Night Live interview program, as well as a thing or two I'm not quite ready to announce yet. Sean, you killed it. Thank you, my friend. There will be additional videos in the following weeks, including an announcement for Season 4. But for now, thanks everyone. You guys are pretty great.